about something that he's kind of spearheaded in the department, which is the evaluation enterprise, and how he's able to bring money into the department through doing evaluation. So, Scott?
Howdy.
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 That's pretty good. I'm just thinking I might have to take the afternoon, go find me some plastic bottles and cut a bunch of holes in the roof. If you've seen our electric bill out around here this summer, that I'm not sure my wife would appreciate it, but man, that was pretty creative.
Good thing you didn't show that while we were still in the stoves.
Yeah, we might have actually done that over there. I think if we did that here, we might get in a little trouble.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about two things. One, very, very briefly, and the other a little bit more. If you saw the title up here, it was Consulting, Contracts, and Private Sector Partnerships. So I'm going to talk a little bit about consulting and contracts. So, Dr. Pena, don't take anything I'm getting ready to say as a personal against you over here, because Dr. Pena is very good with grants. But let me just talk a little bit about, the traditional funding source in an academic institution is grants. You're going to hear, those of you that are graduate students, you hear grants, grants, grants. Those coming in, you're going to hear grants, grants. If you end up in an academic institution working, you're going to hear grants all the time. While that's really good, here's my two issues I have with grants. One, the acceptance rate's pretty low. And if you've ever had a job where you're on soft money and you live and die by the grant, it's a pretty high-pressured situation to be in. Number two is the latent period between applying for one and getting a grant is sometimes pretty long, especially if you don't get it on the first round and you're resubmitting. So grants are a definite, very, very important way to bring in funding to an institution, like the Texas A&M, Texas Ag-Life Extension Service, a department. In Ag-Life Extension, we get about 29% of our funding outside the typical environment from the state and feds and the counties. And that's growing every year. It's growing exponentially. But the other side of the coin are contracts. And we, as an organization, as a unit, as a department, have had to start thinking a little differently over the past 3 or 4 years. So let's talk a little bit about contracts. Contracts are a different way of thinking. Sometimes, we can be very proactive and go out and find contracts. And when I mean, so let me define contracts. Contracts are, we go to somebody and say, we've got a service we can provide you for this amount of money. Or somebody comes to us and says, we need this done, and we say we can provide this for this dollar amount. It's very entrepreneurial. It's no different than a contract in the business world. We're just doing it in the academic world. Here's the benefit of contracts. They're quick. Sometimes they're worth a lot of money. And because they're a contract, you can pretty much bank on it. Now, being a little careful about how I say that, because the sports world is talking a lot about contracts these days, and I think there are some institutions that are banking on it that may not get their money. So we'll put that over on the side. So let me give you two examples of how we came into two pretty good sized contracts that are now leading to us thinking in a very different direction. Anybody know what, besides, Sunday was a very important day last Sunday was a very important day in our nation's history with the 10th anniversary of 9/11. But on Tuesday of this week was another pretty important anniversary in the state of Texas. Anybody have any idea what Tuesday was? September 13th.
Dove season?
Not dove season. 3 years ago, September 13th. Dr. Murphy, you don't count. Oh, anybody live in Galveston, Harris County, Beaumont, Chambers County? Anybody from that area? What was September 13th? Oh my God, guys. Hurricane Ike.
Oh, yeah. Destroyed my house.
Yeah. Third anniversary of Hurricane Ike. Well, in March of 2000, so that had been 2008. In March of 2009, we received a phone call, a very innocent phone call from one of our retired employees who had been in a meeting in Austin with the State Health and Human Service Commission. And that call was something like, hey, State Health and Human Services wants to know, they're working on a project to provide case management services to the survivors of Hurricane Ike. They're looking for an evaluation team we told them about y'all, we thought you might want to talk to them. I said, okay, who knows. So a 30-minute conversation on the phone with the individuals in Austin led to a $1.8 million contract. Literally a 30-minute conversation on the phone. We in this department had never seen, we'd seen grants big, but we had never seen a contract quite of that magnitude that turned around that quick. So through some discussions, and I say 1.8 million, it started off at 900,000, and through extensions and additional funding went all the way to 1.8 million. So because of that opportunity, we hired 8 individuals. Let's see, one of which is, or 2 in here. 2 of which are in this room. Megan McClure and Kevin both worked on that project. Kevin almost the entire time of the project. Megan the last year of the contract.
We both were last year.
Yeah, the last year. So we hired field evaluators. When they said, we want y'all to do this, give us a budget. Our initial budget we were going to submit was about $600,000. They came back on a phone call and said, make it Christmas. Give us your Christmas wish list. We jumped it up quite a bit, and they accepted it. What turned out to be, what started as a 13-month, $900,000 project ended up being a 25-month, $1.8 million contract. That brought in a lot of money to the department, to the organization, to extension, to the unit. Matter of fact, it brought in enough money that it allowed us for 2 years not to be impacted by the state budget cuts. Now, unfortunately, money runs out, and you get impacted. But those are so that contract happened. We just finished it, turned in the final report July 31st of this year. Trying to figure out what we're doing next. In the middle of that, or towards the waning months of that, in March of this year, because of that contract, we received another phone call from the Department of State Health Services through some work with our Family Development Resource Management Group and Extension, saying they wanted to evaluate the impact of H1N1 epidemic in Texas. Well, before we knew it, there was another $300,000 coming in to do that. What that led us to do, it led us to think and say, there is a market here. There is a niche for doing contracts and evaluation services that are very different. Now, we've done, for years, and our group had done $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 projects with horticulture, with our Better Living for Texan program, some work with 4-H program. Very small things. I mean, $1,000, $1,500, $7,000. I think the largest thing we'd ever done was $12,000. So we went from $12,000 to $1.8 million in the scope of work. What that led us to do is to think, there are state agencies, there are other extension services in the United States, there are agencies within the Texas A&M system like Texas Ag-Life Research, there are entities in the College of Ag and Life Sciences that need evaluation work or accountability work or strategic planning that don't have the personnel, that don't have the resources to hire people to do it, but they've got dollars that they can pay out. So we have created, because of this, something we're calling the evaluation enterprise. And it took a little bit of selling, and we've taken all the money we saved in indirect and those incoming graduate students or current graduate students. Indirect dollars are the dollars that come back to an institution that pay for the lights, that pay for the water, that pay for maintenance and facilities. Well, those dollars, some of those dollars on a project come back, and some of them are shared back with departments and units for their use. We've taken those, saved those, banked some other dollars that we were able to do on some of these projects, and been able to keep a person on staff for 18 months or so. And our job now, what we're getting ready to do, we're getting ready to hit the ground running. We have a meeting next week to get it really going, to go after other business. Now, we're also applying for grants. We're also working with people in the grant area to be on grants. But the quick, easy, I shouldn't say easy, the quick turnaround dollars are in these contracts. That is not something as an academic institution that we've thought about, but it is an out-of-the-box, entrepreneurial way to think about business. we know these $1.8 million contracts aren't going to come around every day. Frankly, we don't want them to come around every day. They're big. They take a lot of time to manage. They take a lot of personnel to accomplish them. But what we're hoping to do is have one of those every few years, and then work off some of these smaller, even $5,000 or $6,000, $50,000, which in a Texas Department of Agriculture, Parks and Wildlife, all these, that's not a whole lot of money. They get grants. The money from the State Health Services Group to do H1N1 came through CDC. So CDC had given them money to do some stuff. Part of that was to evaluate their communication strategy. And not only have we then, of course, I said hired people, we've given graduate students opportunities for funding, graduate students opportunities to go out and do data collection, focus groups, work on writing reports, work on analyzing data, to do a thesis, a dissertation, whatever it may be. There's a lot of different ways this pays off in a lot of other directions. We kind of had one of those sarcastic comments made to us by one of our partner organizations, and one of their internal evaluators said, well, you could probably get 8 dissertations out of this data. And I kind of chuckled and said, 8? We might get 80 dissertations out of this data. There's that much information available to have in what we did in that project. So those contracts are a certain way to go. Grants are a certain way to go. I think what it is, it's building your portfolio of what you're able to do. Fee-for-service projects, writing grants where you're the lead, and participating in grants where you know you're certainly not the lead, but you can provide support to those projects. So it covers the bases. So that's kind of contract work. That's what we consider contract work. Now the other side is consulting, and consulting really has been, for most of us that are on the faculty, been something we've done to increase our own salary. It's been a personal thing, and there's some expectation if we have expertise to do those types of things. I think though there's another way to do it, and that's internal consulting, where we're doing the work as the unit. We're doing the work as the organization. Very similar to a contract, but it may be a one person doing something on a very short basis, one day. We've done some training. Sometimes it's done on a personal improvement, professional improvement, personal basis. Those are other ways to bring in dollars, either individually or in a group. There are pretty strict guidelines as far as being an organization, an agency within the system on how those are handled. I can't just go out and do my job, my day-to-day job as a consultant. That doesn't work. That doesn't fly. But I can certainly take my expertise out of my area and do that type of work as a consultant. So that's a quick and dirty kind of run through of a different way of thinking for bringing in dollars. And I know Dr. Wingenbach's going to talk a little bit more about contracting and private sector partnerships, and the whole thing is thinking differently. And that's the message I've been trying to portray to people in the department and people in our group, is we just have to think differently. We cannot be the same old academic institution that we've been and expect to survive. And even when you do grants or grant work, it's just not USDA. It's Department of Defense. It's Department of Education. It's National Institute of Health. It's Center for Disease Control. Think about all the stuff that we can do that are out there. So I don't know if you want to save questions for the end,
questions
or
right now,
do
maybe
questions
about 5
now,
to
and
7
then
minutes.
Dr. Wingenbach will come on. Gary?
Just thorough, man, there's no question.
Summer.
I have a question. So do you have any recommendations on where you could go for some contracts? Like, would you go to Center for Disease Control?
Well, I'll tell you what we're getting ready to do. We formed an advisory committee that's in the department. Kevin's going to sit on that. Dr. Wingenbach, Dr. Murphy's on it. We're meeting next Tuesday, and one of the things we're going to do on Tuesday is we're going to brainstorm. But I can already tell you, one of the things we had to do to get this pushed across to our administration is it had to fit the mission of Extension. So we're not going to jump out there and go do evaluations for pharmaceutical companies. That's probably not in our best interest to do that. But we're going to go talk to people in the Texas Department of Agriculture. We're going to go to Texas Parks and Wildlife. We're going to go to the Natural Resource Conservation Commission. We're going to go back to the state health services, back to Health and Human Services. The project we did with them on Ike was FEMA based. That's where the dollars come from. We're talking to FEMA right now. We're actually looking at a project right now based on the wildfires in Bastrop and through Texas. They're interested in how people recover from those. We're trying to open all those doors. So we're trying to look at those private-public partnerships, and most of the ones I've talked about are public, but they fit the mission of extension, building the quality of life, serving people in the counties in the state of Texas or in the U.S.
Are y'all looking at only doing this in the state of Texas, or are there other institutions?
No. We're looking outside. I've already had a discussion that the director of Maryland Extension is a pretty good friend of mine. I've already talked to him. They don't have money in Maryland to hire an evaluation staff like we've got, so we've talked to him a little bit. So yeah, I think that's where we can look at the cooperative extension system nationally, and is there an opportunity? Now, we can't forget our roots.
Right.
But we are not using any dollars that come from the state of Texas to run this enterprise. In order for this to work, it has to be a self-funding, what we call an auxiliary enterprise, and if we don't have the dollars, we're not going to have anybody on, and it's not going to work. So we're not using any state dollars, and we'll be watching pretty close that we don't use state dollars to do that.
To that end, I guess I just want to add, are these contracts commonly being able to be written as like fixed price, or or is it more of a cost reimbursable nature? From the standpoint of these are our expense structures, this is what we're going to incur,
The Hurricane Ike project was what we call a cost reimbursable project. In other words, we projected out, we had a max of 1.8 million. We submitted every month a bill to Health and Human Services through FEMA and got paid back. The great thing about being in an institution this big is they can front you the money. So Grants and Contracts had $1.8 million in our budget, so you can do that. The H1N1 was a flat fee. We're going to do this. It's going to cost you $296,000. We received $50,000 a month for 4 months, and then a $96,000 payment for the final report that was delivered. No matter what happened, that's what they were paying us. But we had to deliver. If we didn't deliver, that's what they were paying us.
No, I was just curious. Because obviously this is paramount as far as what you already, like you said, what you are able to retain and to fund, seed money.
Now, on the big projects, I think cost reimbursable is the way to go. On the small projects, we definitely want to stay with this fixed money. We're going to do this for you. It's going to cost this amount of money, and we could actually come out on the winning side, or we could eat it big time. If that project, we estimated $296,000. If it had cost us $350,000, guess what? I'd had to find $54,000 from somewhere, and I probably wouldn't have been standing here talking today. That's not a good thing to say we need to borrow money. That doesn't work real well.
It puts more emphasis on that consulting thing that you said.
Well, it puts a lot of emphasis on being really good up front doing a budget. And we've got a spreadsheet now. We can plug numbers in and say, in order to do X, it's going to cost you Y. And we don't differentiate. Data analysis is X amount of dollars. If it's basic analysis, it may only take 2 hours. If it's very sophisticated, it may take 40 hours. That's where the cost difference comes in. It's not the service, it's the amount of time it takes to deliver the service.
Anything else?
No, good questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Cummings.
Follow that, Dr. Wimbock.
We've got Dr. Jerry Wingenbach. He's a professor in our department, focuses on